Day 1. 0347 hours local planet time. The emergency klaxon was still screaming when engineer Cale Draven crawled out of the wreckage of the ISS Meridian survey pod. The ship had come down hard on a red-orange plateau, shearing off its left thruster nacelle and crumpling the forward hull like foil. Smoke poured from the engine cavity. One of Vareth 9's twin sons, the smaller blue-white one the crew had nicknamed Little Ghost, was already cresting the horizon, painting the alien desert in shades of copper and rust. Cale was 34 years old, a structural and environmental engineer with 11 years of deep space survey experience. He had survived 2 hull breaches, 1 reactor coolant leak, and a micrometeorite impact that had destroyed his bunk while he was standing 6 feet away eating a protein pack. He was not, by any measure, a man who panicked. He took stock. The life support module was intact. That was the most important thing. Oxygen recyclers, water reclamation core, and the emergency battery bank had all survived the impact behind their reinforced bulkheads. He had food stores for approximately 210 days at standard ration levels. The distress beacon had activated automatically, but given Vareth 9's position at the outer edge of the Cal 7 survey corridor, any rescue response would take a minimum of 180 days, and that assumed the beacon signal punched through the planet's ionospheric interference layer, which initial diagnostics rated as only a 61% probability. He had roughly 6 months, possibly more, possibly alone, on a planet that the survey brief described with clinical indifference as extreme thermal variance. Surface temperature range minus 40 degrees Celsius night to plus 78 degrees Celsius day. No confirmed indigenous sentient life. Subsurface liquid water deposits confirmed at depths of 8 to 22 meters in the equatorial basin zones. Hostile microbial and macrofauna presence probable. Cale read that last line twice. Probable. He spent the first 3 days conducting damage assessment and cataloging his salvageable materials. The pod's structural skeleton, high-grade titanium aluminum alloy framing, was largely intact. He had 12 rolls of thermal-bonded composite sheeting, originally intended for atmospheric research shelters. He had a portable plasma cutter, 2 Grade 3 excavation drones, the third had been destroyed in the crash, a full geological survey kit, and roughly 400 kilograms of miscellaneous equipment ranging from the scientifically invaluable to the apparently useless. Among the apparently useless, a crate of recreational equipment. The Meridian had been a long-haul survey vessel, and crew welfare was taken seriously. Inside the crate he found 2 folding kayaks, a portable water filtration sport kit, and wrapped in impact foam, a modular water slide system designed for use in orbital recreation modules. It was bright orange, rated for 150 kilograms of occupant weight, and could be configured in 17 different layouts. Cale stared at it for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would define the next 200 days of his life. He was not going to simply survive. He was going to build something. Something real. Something that would demonstrate to whatever alien eyes or rescue sensors eventually found this place, exactly what a human being could accomplish alone, with limited resources on a hostile world. He was going to build an underground habitat, a proper one with a functioning water system, environmental controls, and yes, because the universe apparently had a sense of humor, a working water slide. By day 5, Cale had completed a full geological survey of the immediate area using his remaining 2 drones. The data confirmed what the original survey brief had hinted at. At approximately 11 meters below the plateau surface, there was a substantial subsurface water table. The water was mineral-rich and would require filtration, but it was liquid, it was abundant, and it was accessible. More importantly, the substrate geology was almost ideal for excavation. The upper 8 meters consisted of compressed sedimentary rock, reddish, iron-rich, relatively soft by geological standards. Below that, the rock transitioned to a denser basalt layer that formed a natural structural ceiling. If he excavated down through the sedimentary layer and into the upper basalt interface, he would have walls and a ceiling that could support enormous loads without additional reinforcement. He named the site Base Meridian. He named the chamber he intended to build the vault. Day 7. He powered up the first excavation drone and sent it down. The process was agonizingly slow at first. The drone's cutting heads were designed for geological sampling, not large-scale excavation, and Cale quickly realized that if he used them at full power without modification, he would burn out the motors within 2 weeks. He spent 3 days re-engineering the drone's cutting program, reducing the bite depth per pass, increasing rotational speed, adding a cooling cycle between passes. It was painstaking work, performed in the brutal daytime heat of Vareth 9's twin suns while wearing a reflective thermal suit that made him feel like a roasting vegetable. But on day 10 the drone broke through to the first significant void pocket, a natural cavern roughly 4 meters wide and 2 meters tall, carved by ancient water erosion. This changed everything. Instead of excavating from scratch, Kale could work with the planet's own geology, expanding existing voids rather than cutting entirely through solid rock. He began mapping the void network with sensor probes. Over the next 2 weeks, he discovered that the plateau beneath him contained an interconnected series of natural caverns covering an area of nearly 800 square meters. Most were small, irregular, and structurally unstable. But 3 of them, clustered in a rough triangular arrangement roughly 11 meters below the surface, were large, stable, and positioned almost directly above the water table. He named them Chamber Alpha, Chamber Beta, and Chamber Gamma. Alpha was the largest, roughly 22 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 6 meters tall at its highest point. It would become the main living and working space. Beta was smaller but had the most direct access to the water table and would become the water processing and storage center. Gamma was irregular in shape but had an intriguing feature. Its floor sloped naturally downward at an angle of approximately 30 degrees before leveling out into a shallow depression that, once the water table was accessed, would fill naturally with filtered groundwater. Kale looked at Chamber Gamma for a long time. Then he looked at the orange water slide kit still sitting in its foam-padded crate. He started drawing plans. By day 20, excavation was proceeding on 4 parallel tracks. Drone 1 was widening the primary access shaft, a vertical tunnel from the surface down to Chamber Alpha. Drone 2 was clearing debris from the connection passages between the 3 chambers. Kale himself, working with the plasma cutter and a collection of improvised hand tools made from salvaged ship components, was reinforcing the chamber walls with sections of the pod's structural framing. The work was brutally physical. On a 1.18 G world with daytime temperatures that could kill an unprotected human in 40 minutes, every hour outside the life support module was a calculated risk. Kale developed a strict rotation: 4 hours of work, 90 minutes of rest and rehydration for more hours of work. He slept in 6-hour blocks, always in the surviving section of the pod, always with the environmental monitors active. He lost 4 kilograms in the first 3 weeks. He gained something harder to quantify: a deep, almost meditative clarity of purpose. Every bolt he placed, every wall section he aligned, every calculation he ran on his battered datapad felt meaningful in a way that years of corporate survey work had never quite achieved. By day 30 he had a functioning access shaft, 3 structurally sound chambers, and a rough schematic for a water system that, if his geological models were accurate, would sustain not just survival but genuine habitation. He sat at the edge of the access shaft in the cooling night air, looking up at the alien stars through his visor. Vareth 9's night sky was extraordinary. The Kel 7 binary system sat at the edge of a dense star-forming nebula, and the sky blazed with color and light in a way that no human had ever photographed from the ground before. Kale recorded a log entry. Day 30. Access complete. Chambers secured. Water system design finalized. Beginning phase 2 tomorrow. He paused. Also, the slide is going to be spectacular. He meant it as a joke. By day 200 he would mean it as a fact. Day 31. The water changed everything. Kale had run the geological models 17 times before he trusted them enough to commit to the drilling sequence. The models said that the water table beneath Chamber Beta sat at a pressure differential that would allow controlled extraction, meaning that if he drilled the right size aperture in the right location, the water would not catastrophically flood the chamber but would instead flow at a manageable rate into a collection basin he could then regulate with salvaged valve hardware from the pod's coolant system. The models were correct. On the morning of day 31, when Drone 1 finished the final bore into the water table and Kale cracked the extracted core sample open in his gloved hands, clear mineral water seeped up through the hole with quiet, almost polite insistence, as if it had been waiting 11 meters underground for exactly this moment. He sat in Chamber Beta and watched it fill his collection basin for 20 minutes without moving. The water was cold, approximately 8 degrees Celsius, and rich with dissolved minerals. His portable spectrometer identified calcium, magnesium, silicate compounds, and trace amounts of a complex organic molecule that his database tentatively classified as a biosignature byproduct. This was important. It meant the water table was not a sealed fossil reservoir but an active system, fed, most likely, by deep subsurface chemical processes or by infiltration from somewhere in the planet's geological cycle. The water would replenish. He had, in practical terms, an unlimited water supply. The next 15 days were dedicated entirely to the water processing system. Cale's engineering background was structural and environmental, which meant he understood fluid dynamics, pressure systems and filtration design at a professional level. He also had the pod's emergency water reclamation unit, a robust, militarily specified piece of hardware designed to process contaminated water into drinking quality output under extreme field conditions. He married the planet's natural water supply to this unit with a system of pipes, fittings, and valves fabricated from salvaged pod components, supplemented by sections of the composite sheeting he had heat formed into cylindrical conduits. It was not elegant work. The pipes were mismatched, the joints were sealed with a compound he mixed himself from mineral paste and thermal adhesive, and the whole assembly looked less like an engineering schematic and more like something that had grown organically through a fever dream. But it worked. By day 45, Chamber Beta contained a functioning water processing station capable of producing 400 liters of drinking quality water per day, roughly 12 times Cale's personal daily requirement. He had excess. He had options. The options immediately multiplied his planning possibilities. With water secured, he turned to power. The pod's emergency battery bank was substantial, designed to sustain life support for 90 days at minimum draw, but Cale had been supplementing it since day 3 with a pair of portable solar collection panels deployed on the surface. Varith 9's twin suns, while brutal, were also extraordinarily energy-rich. On a clear day, and most days on this part of the planet were clear, the atmosphere being thin and dry, the panels generated nearly 4 times their rated output. He was not going to run out of power. By day 50, Chamber Alpha had been transformed from a raw geological void into something that, while still rough-edged and cave-like, was genuinely habitable. Cale had lined the walls with composite sheeting to block the mineral dust that constantly flaked from the rock. He had installed a thermal regulation system using ductwork salvaged from the pod, warm air from the surface during the day, recycled heat from the processing equipment at night, that kept the chamber at a stable 20 degrees Celsius regardless of the surface extremes. He had created a sleeping area, a work area, a small kitchen space, and a laboratory station where he continued his geological and biological analysis of everything the planet offered him. He had also begun construction on the water slide system. This requires some explanation because the decision to build a functioning recreational water slide in an underground survival habitat on a hostile alien world was not, on its surface, the most rational allocation of limited engineering resources. Cale was aware of this. He had written several log entries wrestling with the question, running the numbers, justifying the choice from multiple angles. The practical argument was actually quite solid. The modular slide system, when he examined it in detail, was not simply a recreational toy. It was a sophisticated piece of fluid dynamics engineering, designed for microgravity recreation. It incorporated variable pitch channel sections, pressure-activated water circulation pumps, and a collection basin system with integral recirculation. In other words, it was exactly the kind of closed-loop water circulation hardware he needed for Chamber Gamma, which he had designated as the habitat's water leisure area, a space that would serve the critically important function of psychological sustainability. Cale had studied survival psychology extensively as part of his emergency training certification. The research was unambiguous. In isolated long-duration survival scenarios, psychological breakdown was statistically more likely to cause mission failure than physical resource depletion. The human mind needed stimulation, beauty, play, and sensory variety. A functioning pool with clean warm water and a working slide was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. He told himself this repeatedly while grinning like an idiot as he assembled the first slide section. Chamber Gamma's natural slope, that 30-degree decline he had noted in his initial survey, turned out to be almost perfectly suited to the slide system's intended geometry. The modular sections, when arrayed along the slope, created a run of nearly 18 meters from the top of the chamber to the collection pool at the base. Cale expanded the natural pool depression using the plasma cutter, creating a basin approximately 6 meters wide and 2 meters deep. He lined it with heat-formed composite sheeting sealed with his mineral adhesive compound, then installed the recirculation pump from the slide kit to create a continuous water flow. On day 63 he filled the pool for the first time. The water came from his processing system, warm, clean, filtered to drinking quality. It took 4 hours to fill the basin to operational depth. Cale sat on the edge with his feet dangling in the water and drank tea from a salvaged thermal mug and felt, for the first time since the crash, something he could only describe as contentment. He still had 137 days before minimum rescue window. He still had no certainty the beacon was transmitting. He still had an unknown number of potential macrofauna threats lurking somewhere out there on the surface. None of that felt as immediately important as the fact that the water was warm and there was a slide. He spent day 64 testing the slide system. The first run was cautious. He sent a ballast pack down at first, measuring forces and speeds and splash characteristics. The system performed within parameters. The second run, he went himself, wearing only his base layer undersuit and a look of pure scientific inquiry that lasted approximately 4 seconds before dissolving into audible laughter. The slide was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. The modular sections had been configured in a slight spiral descent that used Gamma's natural width to create 2 turns before the final straight run into the pool. The water flow from the recirculation system was strong enough to maintain a near-frictionless film across the channel surface. Speed at the pool entry was approximately 7.2 meters per second. In practical terms, it was very, very fast, and the splash at the end was enormous. Kale's log entry for day 64 was brief. Slide operational. Physics confirmed. Structural integrity, excellent. Psychological value, incalculable. Beginning electrical installation in chamber alpha tomorrow. Also, I may have screamed. The log will reflect this as a sustained vocalization consistent with performance evaluation protocols. By day 80, Base Meridian had 3 fully operational chambers, a functioning water system producing surplus output, a lighting grid using salvaged LED arrays that gave the underground space an almost warm amber glow, and a water recreational facility that would have been ambitious on a purpose-built orbital station. On the surface, Vareth 9's twin suns continued their indifferent burning. Below, 11 meters down in the red rock, a human being had decided that survival was not enough. He was going to thrive. Day 84. Something moved on the eastern ridge. Kale saw it on camera 3, one of 6 surface-mounted optical sensors he had deployed in a perimeter ring around the access shaft entrance. The image was thermal overlay composite, designed to distinguish biological heat signatures from the surrounding rock even in the brutal daytime temperatures. What it showed him at 1,127 hours on day 84 was unambiguous. 3 heat signatures, bipedal, approximately 1.8 meters tall, moving in coordinated formation along the ridge crest 340 meters to the east. They were not moving randomly. They were watching the access shaft. Kale went very still at his workstation. He pulled up the full camera array on his datapad and reviewed the last 6 hours of footage. The signatures had first appeared on camera 5 at 0623 hours, 4 hours before he had noticed them. They had spent those 4 hours conducting what could only be described as a systematic observation of the site. They had moved in a pattern consistent with deliberate reconnaissance. One observer stationary while 2 others repositioned, then rotating, maintaining overlapping lines of sight without ever exposing all 3 to the same approach vector simultaneously. These were not animals. The survey brief had said, no confirmed indigenous sentient life. The word confirmed was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. It now appeared. Kale spent the next 6 hours reviewing everything he knew, or more accurately, everything humanity knew, about Vareth 9. The planet had received 3 unmanned survey probes before the Meridian mission, all atmospheric and geological in focus. None had been designed to detect or document surface fauna at any level of behavioral complexity. The probable macrofauna presence, note in the mission brief, had been inferred from biological markers in atmospheric samples, not from direct observation. He was, it appeared, the first human to make confirmed visual contact with the indigenous intelligent species of Vareth 9. He was also hiding 11 meters underground with a water slide. He spent 3 days observing without any attempt at contact. The beings, he began calling them the ridge people in his logs for lack of any better term, continued their observation of the surface site with disciplined regularity. They came at dawn and dusk, when the twin suns were at lower angles and the thermal contrast was less punishing. They never approached closer than 200 meters. They communicated with each other in short, apparently acoustic signals. The surface microphones picked up sequences of clicks and low-frequency resonant tones that his analysis software classified as linguistically structured with a confidence level of 87%. They were talking. About him, presumably. On day 89, Kale made his first decision about contact. He would not initiate it. Not yet. He needed more information, and he needed to understand what his presence meant to them before he added the complication of direct interaction. He was one human, alone, with no diplomatic training, no cultural briefing, and no backup. The wrong move could turn an observation scenario into something considerably more dangerous. Instead, he began leaving things. Nothing threatening. Nothing that could be interpreted as a territorial marker or a challenge. On day 91, he placed 3 items on a flat rock 250 meters from the shaft entrance, in a position visible from the ridge. A geometric shape he had cut from composite sheeting, a circle, a triangle, a square, elementary forms, a universal language starter, a sealed sample container filled with purified water, and a small LED lamp set to cycle through colors at regular intervals. He watched camera 3 for 6 hours. At 1843 hours, one of the ridge people descended from the ridge alone. It moved with extraordinary caution, stopping every few meters, surveying the surroundings, communicating with the 2 on the ridge in quick bursts of clicks. It reached the flat rock. It studied the geometric shapes for 11 minutes without touching them. It picked up the LED lamp and held it at arm's length, watching the color cycle with an intensity that Cale found deeply relatable. Then it set the lamp down, picked up the water container, examined the seal and carried it back up the ridge. That was enough for Cale. They were curious. They were careful. They were intelligent. He spent the next 2 weeks developing a contact protocol. He left more items, increasingly complex, increasingly interactive. On day 95 he left a simple mechanical puzzle, a ball and maze device from the recreational equipment crate. By day 97 it had been solved and left back on the rock, with 2 additional objects placed beside it. Smooth stones, arranged in a pattern that took Cale 4 hours to realize was a response to his triangle-circle-square sequence. They had added a 4th shape, a complex polygon he had never left. They were introducing themselves. By day 110, the communication had evolved to a point where Cale had a working vocabulary of approximately 40 shared concepts, built through a painstaking process of object reference, gesture observation through the cameras, and careful reciprocal offering. He knew they understood the concepts of water, light, shelter, danger, curiosity, and greeting. He believed, with cautious confidence, that they understood he was not a threat. On day 112, he opened the access hatch and stood at the top of the shaft entrance in the late afternoon light, in full view of the ridge, with his hands held open at his sides. The 3 ridge people stood on the ridge and watched him for 22 minutes. Then the one who had previously descended, the one he had privately named Scout, raised both hands to shoulder height, palms outward. It was not a human gesture. But the meaning was close enough. Cale raised his hands in response. Over the following 2 weeks, contact deepened carefully and methodically. Scout began approaching the surface side alone, at distances that decreased incrementally each day. By day 120, Cale and Scout were sitting 12 meters apart on the plateau surface, exchanging objects and attempting acoustic communication. Cale attempting the click and resonance patterns he had catalogued, Scout apparently attempting something approximating human vowel sounds with what seemed like genuine effort and occasional apparent frustration. The frustration Cale understood. The effort he respected deeply. On day 125, Scout came to the access shaft opening, looked down into the lighted tunnel, and made a sound Cale had not heard before. A long, sustained rising tone that his gut told him meant a question. He gestured downward. Then he began descending the ladder. Scout followed. Cale led the way through the tunnel into Chamber Alpha, his heart hammering with a mixture of scientific excitement, genuine anxiety, and the slightly absurd awareness that he was about to show an indigenous alien intelligence his DIY underground survival habitat. He stopped at the Chamber Alpha threshold and turned on the full lighting array, warm amber, calibrated to a level he had assessed as comfortable based on Scout's apparent photosensitivity. Scout stopped in the entrance and went absolutely still. Its visual organs, 3 of them arranged in a slight arc above a narrow nasal structure, moved slowly around the chamber. It took in the walls, the thermal ducting, the workstation, the food preparation area, the sleeping space. It made no sound for nearly 3 minutes. Then it turned and clicked rapidly up the shaft. Cale stood in his chamber alone, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. 40 minutes later, Scout returned. With the other 2. All 3 of them stood in Chamber Alpha and looked around. Then one of the others, larger, with different patterning on its visible skin, moved to Cale's workstation and examined the data pad. Carefully. Without touching it. Then it turned to Cale and made a series of sounds. His analysis software, working from the 40 concept vocabulary he had built, returned a confidence-weighted interpretation. Curiosity, question, construction, purpose. They were asking him what he had built and why. Cale thought about how to answer that. Then he made a decision. He led them to Chamber Gamma. They stood at the top of the slope and looked down at the water, lit from below by the LED strips he had installed along the pool walls, glowing blue and clear, and at the orange modular slide descending in its gentle spiral. The recirculation system was running, sending a clear shimmer of water down the channel surface. All three made a sound simultaneously. It was not in his vocabulary, but it felt like wonder. He smiled. He pointed to the slide. He pointed to himself. He made a descending gesture with his hand. Then, feeling slightly ridiculous, he sat at the top of the slide, pushed off and went down. The splash was, as always, enormous. He came up sputtering and grinning and found three alien intelligences staring at him from the edge of the pool with an expression he had absolutely no cultural framework to interpret. He pointed to the slide. He pointed to Scout. Scout looked at the slide for a long time. Then it looked at Kale. Then it looked at the slide again. Day 125 would go into Kale's logs as the day he made first contact with indigenous intelligent life on Vareth 9. Day 126 would go into his logs as the day one of them went down the slide. Day 131. There were 9 of them now. The word had spread, through whatever communication network the Ridge people maintained, with a speed that surprised Kale even in retrospect. Within 5 days of Scout's first descent into Base Meridian, a total of 9 individuals had made the journey down the access shaft and through the chambers, each guided by Scout with what appeared to be a carefully structured orientation protocol. They came in small groups of 2 or 3. They never touched anything without observing Kale's response first. They communicated constantly among themselves and increasingly with Kale through their developing shared vocabulary. He had named them carefully and with full awareness that he was projecting, for his own organizational purposes. Scout remained Scout. The large one who had examined his datapad was Scholar. The smallest, quick-moving, apparently young, endlessly fascinated by the LED lighting system, was Spark. They were helping him build. This had not been planned. It had evolved organically from a moment on day 133 when Kale had been struggling with the installation of an additional support brace in Chamber Alpha's ceiling, a task that required holding a heavy framing member in position while simultaneously driving a fastener with his plasma tool, an operation that was essentially impossible for one person without additional mechanical rigging. Scholar had watched him struggle for approximately 6 minutes. Then Scholar had walked over, grasped the framing member with remarkable physical strength, held it precisely in position and waited. Kale had completed the installation in 4 minutes. Scholar had examined the finished brace for a long time afterward, touching it at several points, apparently testing its rigidity. Then Scholar had turned to him and made a sound his vocabulary system was beginning to classify with increasing reliability. It meant approximately, "Show me how this works." That was how the educational exchange began. Over the next 2 weeks, Kale developed what he privately thought of as the Meridian Curriculum, a systematic program for sharing engineering knowledge with beings who had no shared mathematical or linguistic framework, using physical demonstration, object manipulation, and the slowly expanding vocabulary they were building together. He taught load distribution by stacking objects and demonstrating failure modes. He taught fluid dynamics by manipulating the water flow from his processing system. He taught thermal management by showing them how the ducting system moved air through the chambers. They were extraordinary students. Not because they had no prior knowledge of relevant principles. They clearly did. Their own construction techniques on the Ridge site showed a sophisticated understanding of load bearing and weather management, but because their approach to knowledge acquisition was fundamentally different from any human student Kale had ever encountered. They never asked what before they understood why. Every concept had to be grounded in demonstrable physical reality before they would accept it. This forced Kale to be a better teacher than he had ever been required to be. He could not rely on abstraction or convention. He had to demonstrate everything from first principles. In return, they taught him things that would, he was certain, be worth more than his weight in research publications when rescue eventually arrived. The Ridge people, he was learning their actual name for themselves through the vocal exchange, a complex sound that he rendered in his logs as Verity, had been living on this plateau for, as best he could determine from archaeological context clues and population demographics, approximately 2,000 years. In that time they had developed a body of practical engineering knowledge entirely independent of human science, built from 2 millennia of trial, error, and careful observation of their environment. Their structural engineering techniques were extraordinary. Working with the plateau's own geology, they had developed a method of in-situ rock modification, using combinations of thermal expansion, controlled cracking, and natural mineral bonding agents derived from local plant analogs, that allowed them to shape load-bearing structures with precision comparable to Kale's salvaged fabrication tools. They needed no metal. They needed no synthetic materials. Everything came from what the planet provided, and their knowledge of what the planet provided was encyclopedic. Cale studied their construction sites on the ridge with the same intensity they brought to his underground chambers, and he felt genuine, deep humility. These people were not primitive. They were differently sophisticated. Their technology had evolved along a completely separate developmental pathway from human technology, optimizing for different constraints, producing different solutions. Neither was inherently superior. Both had things to learn from the other. By day 150, base meridian had changed substantially. With Verity assistance, Cale had extended chamber alpha by nearly 8 meters in the direction of a fourth natural void that the combined geological knowledge of human survey science and 2,000 years of Verity observation had identified as accessible. The extension created a space that functioned as a communal gathering area, where groups of Verity could observe and interact with Cale's systems and where the combined knowledge exchange could happen at scale. He had also completely redesigned the water slide system. The original 17-meter run had been impressive for one person. The new design, incorporating Verity mineral working techniques for channel shaping and Cale's recirculation engineering, was something else entirely. The channel had been extended to 31 meters, incorporating 4 turns, 2 designed by Cale, 2 by Scholar, who had grasped the fluid dynamics principles with what felt like genuine enthusiasm, and a variable pitch section that Scout had suggested after studying the water flow patterns with what Cale could only describe as an engineer's eye. The entry pool at the top, fed from the water processing system, was now 4 meters across, with a depth that allowed a swimmer to wait for the previous rider to clear the run. The exit pool at the bottom had been expanded to 8 meters by 6 meters and was, by any measure, a proper swimming pool. Clear, warm, lit from beneath by the LED array, and fed by a recirculation current that kept the water fresh and oxygenated. On day 155, Cale had his first proper swim in 155 days. He did 4 laps of the pool. He went down the slide 7 times. He was accompanied, by the 4th slide run, by Scout, Spark, and 2 other Verity whose interaction with the water system had evolved from cautious observation to what appeared to be genuine enjoyment over the preceding 2 weeks. The log entry for day 155 was longer than most. Day 155. The slide system is, at this point, objectively better than any recreational water feature I have encountered in any human facility, orbital or surface. This is partly because it was designed by 2 species working together, and partly because necessity and limited materials force better engineering than unlimited budget and committee review. I also want to note for the record that Scout is faster than me. By a significant margin. This is not acceptable and I will be working on my technique. By day 160, Cale had made a decision about the Verity that felt important enough to record formally. He was not going to classify them as primitive. He was not going to treat his interactions with them as simple field anthropology. He was going to treat this, their combined construction project, their mutual knowledge exchange, their shared space, as what it actually was. The first genuine collaborative engineering project between 2 intelligent species. When rescue arrived, if rescue arrived, he was going to make very certain that whoever came understood this distinction. The Verity were not subjects. They were not a discovery to be documented and managed. They were partners. They had helped him build this place. They had made it better than he could have made it alone. He had made it better than it would have been without him. That was what humans did. They showed up somewhere impossible, assessed the situation and built something. And if they were lucky, if they were paying attention, they did it with the people who were already there. On day 165, Scholar presented Cale with a gift. A carved stone object, smoothed by what must have been hours of careful mineral working in the shape of a spiral. It was beautiful. Cale held it for a long time and then looked up and said the Verity word for thank you. A long rising click tone sequence that he had practiced for days and still could not produce with their fluency. Scholar made a sound that Cale's system classified as amusement. Fair enough, he thought. He probably sounded like a human trying to meow. He made the sound again more carefully. By day 175, Base Meridian was no longer a survival shelter. It was a research station, a cultural exchange center, and an underground habitat that would have been remarkable even if it had been built by a full survey team with proper equipment and a 2-year construction timeline. 25 days remained before the minimum rescue window. Cale was starting to feel, very quietly, that he was not ready for it to end. Day 176. The rescue signal came from 240,000 kilometers out. Cale was in Chamber Gamma, swimming laps in the underground pool, when his datapad alarm went off. He pulled himself out of the water and read the screen twice, then sat on the pool edge dripping on the composite sheeting floor and felt something complicated move through him that was not quite happiness and not quite dread and was possibly just the particular emotional weight of an ending. The ISS Callaway was a medium-class emergency response vessel, dispatched 183 days ago when the Meridian's beacon signal had finally punched through Varith 9's ionospheric interference layer, a process that had taken, according to the signal timing data, 23 days longer than the optimistic models had predicted. The Callaway was carrying a rescue team of 12 medical staff, systems engineers, and 2 xenobiologists who had been added to the manifest after the beacon signal's transmission data had included, apparently, more than just Kale's distress ping. The beacon unit, which he had modified on day 15 to improve transmission efficiency, had also been broadcasting his daily log entries. All 176 of them. Including, presumably, the ones about the Verity. And the slide. And day 126. He had approximately 18 hours before the Callaway achieved landing approach. He used them well. First, he told the Verity. This required careful work. The concept of rescue, of other humans arriving from off-world, was complex to communicate with their current shared vocabulary. He used what he had. He referenced the Meridian crash site, pointed skyward, made a gesture he had developed for more of me, and then attempted, with Scholar and Scout both present, to convey the essential point that what was coming was not a threat. Scholar's response surprised him. The elder Verity, he had concluded that Scholar occupied some kind of knowledge keeper or senior engineering role in the Ridge community, went very still for a moment, then made a long series of sounds that Kale's system worked through slowly. The translation was imperfect, but the meaning was recognizable. We have waited for others to come. We are ready. He did not know what that meant. He filed it carefully. Second, he spent 6 hours preparing documentation. Everything he had: the vocabulary database, the geological survey integration, the construction schematics, the behavioral observation logs, the contact protocol records. He compiled it into the most organized data package he could manage and loaded it onto every storage medium he had. When the Callaway's team came down that access shaft, he wanted them to understand immediately, at a gut level, what kind of situation they were entering. This was not a simple rescue extraction. This was a first contact scenario. It needed to be treated accordingly. Third, he went down the slide twice. On day 178 at 0914 hours, the Callaway achieved low orbit and began its descent sequence. Kale was on the surface, standing by the access shaft entrance, watching the sky. The morning light from the smaller blue-white sun was extraordinary. It always was at this hour, painting the plateau in gradients of amber and cobalt that no camera had ever quite captured accurately. Behind him, at 200 meters, the Verity had assembled. Not just the 9 regulars. 47 individuals, of varying apparent ages, in a quiet, organized line along the ridge approach. They had come to see. The Callaway's landing struts touched the plateau surface 800 meters to the west at 1043 hours. Kale watched the crew ramp descend and 12 people in orange rescue suits come down it and begin walking toward him with the brisk urgency of professionals who had been briefed on a 200-day solo survival scenario and were expecting to find someone in very bad shape. Dr. Yenna Marsh, the mission lead, reached him first. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with the kind of eyes that assessed situations rapidly and accurately. She looked him over, healthy, fit, clear-eyed, standing upright without any apparent physical distress. Then she looked past him at the 47 Verity on the ridge. Then she looked back at him. "Draven," she said carefully. "Your logs." "Yes," he said. "We have questions." "I know." He turned and gestured toward the access shaft. "Let me show you what we built." What followed was 3 hours that Kale later described in his official debrief as the most compressed educational experience I have ever witnessed. He led the rescue team through Base Meridian, all 4 chambers, the water processing system, the power grid, the thermal management ducting, the communications array, the laboratory station, while the 2 xenobiologists, Dr. Faye Okafor and Dr. Ren Vasquez, took notes with the focused intensity of people who could feel history moving beneath their feet. When they reached Chamber Gamma, there was a long silence. The pool glowed blue in the LED light. The recirculation current moved in gentle patterns across the surface. The water slide, 31 meters, 4 turns, variable pitch, 2-species design, descended in its spiral from the upper platform to the pool edge. "You built a water slide," Dr. Marsh said. "We built a water slide," Kale said. She looked at the slide for a moment longer. "The geological records will show this excavation took 1 person with 2 drones approximately 200 days. She paused. "Solo build. With assistance from day 133 onward, Kale said. He looked at Dr. Okafor. Which brings me to the Verity. The xenobiologist had been remarkably controlled throughout the tour. Now she set down her recorder carefully and said very quietly, "Tell me everything." He did. The full briefing took 4 hours. He went through the contact sequence, the initial observation, the object exchange protocol, Scout's first descent, the development of the shared vocabulary, the construction collaboration, the slide. He showed them the vocabulary database. He showed them Scholar's gift, the spiral stone which he had been carrying in his chest pocket since day 165. He showed them the footage from the pool cameras on day 126. Dr. Vasquez watched the footage of a Verity going down the water slide at 7.2 meters per second and making a sound that every human present immediately recognized as delight, and he said nothing for almost a minute. Then, "Do they know we're here?" "They assembled on the ridge to watch the Callaway land," Kale said. 47 of them. "I believe Scout arranged it." He paused. "They've been waiting for this. I don't know how long." The first formal meeting between human diplomatic personnel and Verity representatives took place on day 182, on the surface plateau, in the afternoon light of both suns. Kale served as interpreter, imperfect working vocabulary, supplemented by Scholar's remarkable adaptability and Dr. Okafor's rapid absorption of the database. It was not a treaty. It was not a declaration. It was, in the technical diplomatic sense, an introduction. But it was real. It happened. It was recorded. Kale sat to the side during most of it, watching Scout navigate the human team's questions with patient dignity, watching Scholar demonstrate Verity construction techniques to the engineers with the clarity of a master tradesperson, watching Spark, the young one, staring at the Callaway's hull with the same expression Kale imagined he himself had worn looking at the spiral stone. On day 195, Dr. Marsh called him in for his pre-departure briefing. Standard procedure: physical evaluation, psychological assessment, mission debrief structure, transport manifest. "We're scheduled for departure day 200, she said. "I know. You've been through a significant trauma event, the crash, the isolation, the survival conditions. The psychological evaluation team will want." "I understand," Kale said. "I'll cooperate fully." She looked at him for a moment. "Draven, are you all right?" He thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said. "I'm genuinely all right. Better than I was before the crash in some respects." She waited. "I spent 200 days building something," he said. "Not for a corporate survey report or a quarterly deliverable. Just building something because it needed to exist. And I wasn't alone even when I thought I was." He looked at his hands. "I think that's good. For a person. To experience." On day 199 he went down the slide one last time. He had told no one he was going to do this, but when he arrived at Chamber Gamma, Scout was sitting at the pool edge, feet in the water. They sat together for a while without communicating much, a comfortable silence which was its own kind of achievement. Then Scout stood, climbed the access ladder to the slide platform and went down. Then Kale went down. Then Scout again. Then Kale. They did this for an hour. Day 200. 0600 hours. Kale stood at the top of the access shaft and looked down into the warm amber light of Chamber Alpha one last time. The chambers would remain. The Callaway's mission parameters had been updated. Base Meridian was now designated a first contact site under Interstellar Survey Protocol 7, which meant it would be preserved, monitored, and revisited by a dedicated scientific mission within 18 months. The Verity had been informed, through Scholar, of this intention. Scholar had made the sound that Kale's vocabulary classified as acknowledgement and something that might be described as satisfaction. They would be back. Kale climbed out of the shaft into the morning light. The full Verity assembly was there, not just the 47 from the landing day but more. He counted past 60 before he stopped counting. They stood along the ridge in the amber light of the rising blue-white sun, and he stood at the shaft entrance, and for a moment no one moved. Then he raised his hands, palms outward, in the gesture Scout had taught him. 60-something hands went up in response. He turned and walked toward the Callaway. His official rescue report, submitted 12 days later from aboard the vessel and classified Priority 1 by the Survey Authority, contained 847 pages of documentation, 23 terabytes of sensor data, a complete Verity human vocabulary database, 200 days of video logs, full engineering schematics for Base Meridian, and the following concluding statement, unedited, informal, written by Kale at 0200 hours in his bunk while the Callaway made its transit burn toward the jump corridor. "I want to be clear about what happened on Verith 9. I did not discover the verity. They were there. They knew the planet, they knew its water, its rock, its light. They knew things about how to live in that place that I could not have found in 1,000 survey missions. What we did, was find each other and build something together that neither of us could have built alone. That seems worth noting. It seems like the kind of thing that should be in the first paragraph of whatever history gets written about this. There is also a functioning water slide in an underground chamber 11 meters beneath the surface of Varith 9. It is 31 meters long, has 4 turns, and exits into a 6 by 8 meter pool. It was designed collaboratively by one human structural engineer and at least 3 Verity whose names I rendered imprecisely in Latin script for logging purposes. It is the fastest slide I have ever written. It is genuinely spectacular. I think that should be in the history too.